Today is Tuesday, August 11th, 2026, and today is National Presidential Joke Day, which feels appropriate because the presidency is probably one of the few jobs where a person can make a joke and immediately have millions of people wonder, wait, was the microphone actually on? But humor has always been a part of public life. Sometimes it is planned, sometimes it is accidental. And sometimes the funniest moments happen because someone forgets the audience is listening. History is full of those moments. People who were known for one thing, but quietly changed something else. Today we'll meet a Hollywood actress whose most surprising contribution had nothing to do with movies. Then we'll visit one of America's most famous prisons, before it became a symbol of escape attempts and legends. And later, we'll look at an unexpected moment from one of America's greatest explorers. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and your guide through the moments where humanity somehow became both impressive and ridiculous simultaneously. When most people hear the name Hedy Lamarr, they probably think of Hollywood. The movie star, the glamorous actress, the person whose image became one of the most recognizable faces of the 1930s and 1940s. For years, people knew the name Hedy Lamarr because of Hollywood. But somewhere out there were probably people who heard Hedy Lamarr and thought, wait, wasn't that the villain from Blazing Saddles? Funny thing is, the real Hedy Lamarr was actually far more interesting, because behind the movie star was an inventor. During World War II, Lamarr was thinking about something completely different from the world of Hollywood: technology. And specifically, how to solve a problem that could affect the outcome of the war. Radio-controlled torpedoes had a major weakness. Their signals could potentially be jammed or intercepted. If an enemy could interfere with the communication between the operator and the weapon, the entire system could fail. Lamarr had an idea. Working with composer George Antheil, she developed a concept called frequency hopping. The idea was that instead of sending a signal on one frequency that could be blocked, the signal would rapidly switch between frequencies. Like changing channels before someone could stop you. On August 11, 1942, Lamarr and Antheil received a patent for their invention. At the time, it did not immediately become the breakthrough they imagined. But decades later, the ideas behind frequency hopping became connected to technologies that help shape modern wireless communication. And that is what makes Hedy Lamarr's story so fascinating. The world remembered the actress, but hidden behind that image was an inventor, someone whose imagination stretched far beyond the role people expected her to play. And sometimes history does the same thing to places. It takes something ordinary and gives it a completely different identity. That is exactly what happened with a small island in San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz. Before Alcatraz became one of the most famous prisons in American history, it had already served as a military location. But on August 11, 1934, the island entered a new chapter. The first federal prisoners arrived. The idea behind Alcatraz was simple: create a prison that was isolated, secure, difficult to escape. The location itself helped. Surrounded by cold water and strong currents, the island was naturally separated from the city. Over the years, Alcatraz became home to some of the most famous criminals in America. Names like Al Capone became connected to the island. But the reason Alcatraz became legendary was not just the prisoners. It was the image, the island, the walls, the idea that some places were built for people who could not be contained anywhere else. Eventually, Alcatraz closed as a federal prison, but the legend remained. Today, people do not just think of Alcatraz as a building. They think of it as a symbol, a place that can become much larger than what it was originally designed to be. And sometimes, the biggest adventures are remembered for the discoveries. But the reality is usually much more complicated. The journey that made Meriwether Lewis famous was filled with incredible moments. Crossing an unknown continent, mapping new territory, meeting new people, searching for a route to the Pacific Ocean, But on August 11, 1806, the expedition had a much more ordinary problem. Lewis was hunting elk when he was accidentally shot by one of his own men. Lewis believed Pierre Cruzat had mistaken him for an elk because of the clothing he was wearing and the poor visibility. The injury was painful, but fortunately it was not fatal. And honestly, it is one of the most human moments from the entire expedition. Because when we think about exploration, we usually picture the dramatic parts, the discoveries, the maps, the moments that end up in history books. But exploration was also made up of the same things that happen in everyday life. Bad weather, wrong turns, equipment problems, and occasionally a hunting accident caused by someone who was supposed to be on your side. The Lewis and Clark expedition is remembered because of what it accomplished. But moments like this remind us that the people behind those accomplishments were still just people. They were tired, they made mistakes, they dealt with problems as they happened. And that makes the story more interesting, not less. Because history is not just about extraordinary things happening to extraordinary people. It is also about ordinary human moments happening in extraordinary circumstances. And that brings us to someone whose story is also about seeing possibilities where other people saw limitations. He was not known as a celebrity. He was not the person standing in front of the camera. But his work helped change how people interacted with technology. Steve Wozniak was born on August 11, 1950. Long before Apple became one of the most recognizable companies in the world, Wozniak was someone fascinated by electronics, engineering, and solving problems. He was the kind of person who wanted to understand how things worked, and then he wanted to make them better. That curiosity eventually led to the creation of the Apple I and Apple II computers. But what makes Wozniak's story interesting is that his motivation was not simply about building a company. It was about building something elegant, something useful, something that people could actually use. The personal computer revolution did not happen because of one person. It happened because people started believing computers did not have to remain hidden away in universities and corporations. They became tools for ordinary people. And that connects back to the people we have talked about today. Hedy Lamarr was remembered as an actress, but she helped imagine future technology. Alcatraz became more than a prison. Meriwether Lewis became known for exploration, but his journey was filled with very human moments. And Steve Wozniak helped create technology that changed the world, even though his personality was very different from the stereotypical image of a technology pioneer. Anyway, the next time I use a device that connects wirelessly, I'll try to remember that behind every piece of technology is usually someone who is curious enough to ask, what happens if I try this? Which is probably how a lot of things we depend on every day started. And actually, that reminds me of a saying often attributed to Albert Einstein. Any fool can know. The point is to understand. If you'd like to hear more of my work, narration, podcasts, or other projects, you can find it all at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for wandering through history with me for a while. I'll see you tomorrow.